The evening in Portland was quiet. The garage breathed oil and metal. Somewhere in the corner, a clock ticked softly. Nick Randall sat hunched over an old motorcycle, grease running between his fingers, the cold weight of steel answering with every turn of the wrench. Work was the only conversation he still had with himself. The phone rang just as he was about to turn off the light. Unknown number. He didn't like unknown numbers. But he answered anyway. Mr. Randall? A woman's voice, calm, clinical, detached. Yes. Who is this? This is St. Mary's Hospital. You're listed as the emergency contact for a patient named Rachel Myers. The world seemed to tilt slightly. What happened to her? She's fine, the woman said. The delivery went well. It's a baby girl. Silence. Only the sound of rain outside and the distant hum of traffic. There must be some mistake, he said quietly. We're not together. Haven't been for 9 months. Maybe so, the woman replied. But your number is still listed as her emergency contact. We were required to inform you. Then the line went dead. Nick stood in the dark garage, phone still in hand. It felt as though all the air had been pulled out of the room. Rachel. The name he'd tried to bury now echoed inside his head, like a summons. He didn't move. Only listened to the rain, falling not just outside, but somewhere deep inside him. St. Mary's Hospital slept beneath the rain, neon lights reflecting off wet asphalt, the air heavy with antiseptic and exhaustion. Nick stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket. The place smelled too clean, too quiet, like a world where everything was controlled except what really mattered. Miss Myers. Room 24, the nurse said after checking the screen. He nodded and walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing softly. The door was half open. Inside, the lights were dim. A woman sat on the bed, pale, her hair loosely braided. In her arms, a small bundle wrapped in white. Rachel looked up. For a moment, the world froze. Her eyes didn't show surprise or warmth. Just fear. What are you doing here, Nick? Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. They called me, he said. They said he hesitated, had a baby. She turned away, holding the child closer. That was a mistake. They weren't supposed to call you. Nick took a step forward, and instantly she tensed, like every inch between them was a line he wasn't allowed to cross. Why didn't you tell me? Because you weren't supposed to know, she cut in sharply. It's your child? Mine. The word came out like the edge of a blade. Mine and only mine. He didn't answer. Just watched her rocking the baby, her hands trembling, afraid, but unwilling to let go. I didn't come to take anything, he said quietly. I just wanted to understand. Understand, she laughed bitterly, eyes still on the child. You never understood anything, Nick. Not then. Not now. He drew in a slow breath, steadying his voice. I've changed. No, she said. You've just learned how to hide what you really are. Silence stretched between them. A nurse passed in the corridor, footsteps, then stillness again. Is this about what I used to do? He asked at last. Rachel looked down at the baby. I couldn't let her grow up in a world where everything is decided by threats. And you decided I'm part of that world? I decided you're too much like the men you swore you'd never become. He stepped back toward the door. I won't bother you. Don't come here again, she said. She needs quiet, not echoes of your past. He nodded slowly. Turned to leave. Then the baby made a soft sound in her sleep, a fragile, innocent whimper that cut through him like a blade. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "What's her name?" "Lily," Rachel said after a moment. "Beautiful name." "Go, Nick." He closed the door behind him. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, relentless, as if it was trying to wash away everything they'd once been. The rain hadn't stopped when Nick left the hospital. It blurred the city lights into long golden streaks across the windshield as he sat behind the wheel, engine idling. The world outside looked like it was dissolving, and maybe that was easier than facing what waited in his chest. He stared at the hospital entrance for a long time. Rachel wouldn't come out again. She'd made that clear. But still, he couldn't drive away. A flash of headlights in the side mirror caught his eye. A dark sedan had pulled into the far end of the parking lot, no lights, no movement. Just parked there, engine running. Nick's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Old instincts, the ones he'd spent years burying, began to whisper. Not random. Not tonight. He killed the engine, grabbed his jacket, and stepped into the rain. The air was cold enough to bite. He crossed the lot slowly, pretending to head for the street, glancing once more at the sedan. Tinted windows. No plates. He turned the corner and ducked under the awning of a closed pharmacy. From there, he watched. 2 minutes passed. Then the sedan door opened. A man stepped out, tall, coat collar up, moving like someone who'd done this before. He wasn't a cop. Too quiet. Too measured. Nick's pulse steadied. They found me. But who? That was the question. He waited until the man crossed the lot toward the hospital entrance, then slipped into the shadowed alley behind the pharmacy and made his way to his truck. By the time he reached home, the rain had turned to mist. The garage lights flickered to life as he stepped inside. The smell of oil and metal usually calmed him, but not tonight. He sat on the workbench stool, staring at his phone, Rachel's name still glowing in the last call log. 9 months of silence. And now, a baby. And a tale. Coincidence didn't exist in his world. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Yeah. A pause. Then, a man's voice, low and even. Still alive, Randall. That's good to know. The voice was familiar. Nick closed his eyes. Luca. You remember, the man said, almost amused. I wasn't sure you would, after you disappeared like a coward. I walked away, Nick said flatly. You don't walk away from this, Luca replied. You just run until someone decides to stop you. Nick's grip tightened on the phone. You following me? Not me, Luca said. Just keeping an eye. Some people think you still owe them. I don't owe anyone. That's not what they think. And now, a woman shows up again. With your child. That's a dangerous story, Nick. Silence stretched between them. The kind that hummed with unspoken threat. What do you want? Nick asked. To talk, Luca said. Like old times. No. You sure? Because if I have to find you the hard way, it won't be a conversation. The line went dead. Nick exhaled through his teeth, the familiar taste of adrenaline burning the back of his throat. He'd buried that life, the gunmetal nights, the rules of silence. But they were digging him up. He stood, opened the drawer beneath the bench, and stared at the object inside, a small black pistol, wrapped in cloth. He hadn't touched it in years. His reflection in the metal caught the flickering light. You promised her, he muttered to himself. You promised you were done. The sound of tires outside cut through the rain. He froze. 2 cars this time. Engines idling. Through the garage window, faint lights glowed behind the trees. He moved silently to the back door, slipped out into the wet night. Voices, muffled, distant. 2 men, maybe 3. He couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, searching, cautious. Then one voice rose, a man on a phone. Yeah. He's here. Truck still warm. Nick's stomach turned to stone. He stepped deeper into the shadows, every instinct sharpened, every breath measured. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The men stopped talking. Nick took his chance, slipped between the houses, through the fence, and onto the back road that led toward the river. His boots splashed through puddles. The air reeked of wet leaves and rust. Behind him, engines started again. They'd found his truck. He kept walking. Not running, running makes noise. Only when he reached the bridge did he let himself stop. Below, the water churned black under the streetlights. He leaned on the rail, breathing hard. Somewhere behind him, sirens wailed, not for him, not yet. He stared at his reflection trembling in the river. Every time he thought he'd escaped, the past found a new way to speak. And this time, it spoke with a child's name. Night stretched over the suburbs like a dark ribbon. Nick sat in his old pickup, hidden beneath a maple tree outside Rachel's house. The engine was off, the lights too, only the faint green glow of the dashboard flickered across his face. He held the steering wheel as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the world. Through the rain-spattered window he could see her, a shadow framed by the dim light inside. Rachel stood near the curtain, a mug in her hand, though it was clear she wasn't drinking from it. She wasn't watching the street either, her eyes were turned inward, listening to a silence only she could hear. Somewhere inside, the baby whimpered softly, a fragile sound that cut through him more sharply than any siren ever had. A movement in the mirror. Someone was walking down the opposite sidewalk, a man in a hooded jacket. He paused near the corner, looked toward the house, then kept going. Nothing obvious. Nothing criminal. Just the kind of stillness that trained people carried in their bones. Nick's pulse tightened. They're watching again. He pulled out his phone and called Rachel. No answer. He tried again 5 minutes later, this time, the call was declined. He exhaled, stepped out of the truck, and crossed the short walkway to her porch. Raindrops clung to the railing like mercury beads. 3 soft knocks, the rhythm he used years ago, when knocking meant safety, not warning. The door opened just a crack. Rachel stood there, the baby bundled against her chest, eyes pale and wary. She didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. The threshold itself felt like a drawn line, one neither dared cross. Do you stand out there often? She asked. Her tone wasn't angry, it was careful, measuring. No, he said quietly. I came because I was called. I just wanted to be sure you're all right. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Sure. You don't get to check on me, Nick. You lost that right. He took a slow step back, keeping his voice even. They called me from the hospital. I didn't know. I didn't plan any of this. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the baby's blanket. They shouldn't have called. I didn't want you to know. I understand, he said. He did, though understanding didn't make it easier to walk away. Rachel adjusted the blanket, pressing her cheek against the tiny sleeping face. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Don't mistake this for a request. I'm not asking for your help. I'm keeping her safe by keeping you away. I'm not here to help, he said after a moment. But if someone's watching you, I'll be nearby. Not because you asked. Because I can't pretend not to see it. Something flickered across her expression, anger, maybe, or reluctant recognition. So you'll go back to that life? Waiting in the dark, fixing problems the way you used to? He shook his head. No. I'm not that man anymore. I just won't leave if staying keeps you safe. She studied him in silence, long enough that he almost turned to go. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper more than a statement. You can't protect us by standing on a porch, Nick. The quiet doesn't make you invisible. I'm not asking you to trust me, he said softly. Just, let me keep watch. Quietly. If you tell me to leave, I'll leave. Her shoulders eased a fraction. She slid the door chain into place but didn't shut it completely, a cautious gesture that said not forgiven, but not forgotten either. Stay in your truck, she murmured. And keep the lights off. They noticed the lights. He nodded once. I'll be close. She pressed the baby tighter to her chest and stepped back, disappearing into the dim hallway. Through the thin curtains he saw her silhouette move, checking each window, each lock. Then the light went out. Nick returned to the truck and sank into the driver's seat. The engine remained silent, only the rain tapped softly on the roof. He kept his eyes on the front window of the house, where her shadow drifted behind the curtain, small, fragile, alive. Minutes bled into an hour. A car passed slowly at the end of the street, its headlights gliding across the wet pavement, then vanishing. The neighborhood looked calm, but the calm had edges. He knew better than to trust stillness. It always came before movement. The pact between them was unspoken, fragile as glass. He would stay unseen, she would pretend not to know. He wouldn't cross the threshold, she wouldn't call the police. Two lives balanced on silence. And somewhere beyond the streetlights, someone else was listening too. To the quiet, to the rain, to the breath of a man who couldn't stop watching the house he once called home. By nightfall, the rain had thinned to mist, leaving the streets slick and shining. Rachel had put Lily to sleep and sat beside the crib, listening to the small rhythm of her daughter's breathing. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet where even the radiator seemed to hold its breath. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message from Nick, stepping out for a while. Keep the curtains closed. Rachel stared at the words, irritation rising before she could stop it. He had no right to give her instructions, not anymore. And yet, almost against her will, she reached for the cord and drew the curtains shut. A few minutes later, the phone rang. Don't open the door, his voice came low, blurred by wind. And keep the lights off. Where are you? Down by the river. I'll be back soon. You're alone? A pause. Easier that way. She wanted to ask easier for what, but the call ended with the sound of moving water. Rachel paced the kitchen, every creak of the floor loud in the silence. A half-finished cup of tea cooled beside the sink. Outside, footsteps passed on the wet sidewalk, slow, deliberate. The sound didn't stop or hurry near her window, it simply moved. Like someone who knew exactly where not to look. Her hands trembled as she called him back. He answered on the first ring. Where are you, Nick? Riverfront. The old docks. Are you following them? I'm watching them watch you. A metallic scrape echoed through the receiver, metal on concrete, followed by a hollow clang. It sounded like he was inside a large, empty place, cold air, dripping water, oil and rust. "Don't do this," she whispered. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not proving," he said. "I'm surviving. You hear me? Alive. Alive isn't the same as safe." He gave a small exhale that could have been a laugh. "Tell that to the people waiting outside your house." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Just keep the lights off. I'll handle it." The sound of movement shifted again, a ladder creaked, footsteps somewhere above him. "How many?" she asked. "Enough," he murmured. "Don't call me if the line drops." "Then why tell me where you are?" "So you'll know I didn't just disappear." For a while, there was only silence, and the faint echo of dripping water. Then, "Nick?" "Quiet," he whispered. Other footsteps now. Heavier. Voices, low and careful, too distant to make out words. The warehouse itself seemed to breathe metal, water, tension. "They're close," he said. A sharp clang followed, like someone kicking a piece of scrap. Rachel pressed the phone tighter to her ear, as if she could anchor him with the sound. "Say something normal," she whispered. "How's Lily?" "Sleeping." "Good," he said softly. "Keep the curtains closed." Then came a dry crack, wood or metal splitting. Another. She froze, the sound reverberating through the phone. Air filled with the heavy rhythm of motion, breath, and echoing impact. "Nick." "I'm fine," his voice came strained but steady. "Don't panic." "You." "I didn't come here to fight," he said quickly. "Just to leave. In one piece." More noise, sharp, brief, then fading. He was moving now, and she recognized it, not panic, but control. A rhythm that belonged to someone who had learned how to stay alive in dark places. "Go," she whispered, though he couldn't see her. "I am," he said, a low half-laugh. "They don't like the crates." "What?" "Later." Then his voice dropped almost to nothing. Something dragged, canvas, maybe. A muffled grunt. Then stillness. After what felt like an eternity, she heard his voice again. "Do you hear the water?" She listened. Through the faint static, the river murmured beneath the echo of the empty building. "Yes." "Good." The sounds that followed were quick, deliberate, metal shifting, a latch closing, his breath steadying. "Nick?" "I'm leaving now," he said. Two distant bursts of sound, hard to tell what they were, only that they belonged to the night. Then, "Don't wait by the door." The call ended. Rachel stood in the middle of the kitchen, her palms flat on the cold table. The house smelled faintly of soap and rain. The clock ticked, each second stretching longer than the last. She went to Lily's room, knelt beside the crib. Her daughter slept, tiny hand curled against her cheek. Rachel touched her palm, tracing the faint crease across it. That small warmth tethered her to the present. Outside, footsteps again, quicker this time, moving away. An engine turned over down the block, then faded into the distance. A moment later her phone buzzed once more. Message, clear. "Stay inside until morning." She typed back, "Are you hurt?" Silence. Then his reply, "No heroes. No headlines." She stared at the words, reading them twice. No headlines. That could mean anything, or nothing. Either way, it was the language of survival. Her next message was simple, "Don't come to the door. Just give me a sign." The response came a minute later, 3:15. She turned off the lights and stood by the window. At exactly 3:14, the dark outline of the pickup slid briefly into view, then melted back into the trees, soundless, unseen. Her body released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She stayed there long after the street went still again. By the time the clock struck 4, the sky had softened to gray. The air inside smelled faintly of oil, a trace that didn't belong here, carried in by the wind from the river. On the doorstep, just before dawn, she found a small strip of black tape pressed to the mat. To anyone else, meaningless. To her, a sign, safe, for now. Rachel folded it, placed it in the drawer beside her pens, as if safety could be stored like a secret. When she closed it, she realized that for the first time in months, she believed him, not in his words, but in the silence between them. From somewhere down the street, faint music drifted through an open window, an old radio tune carried by the morning breeze. The city was waking. But in her house, the air still held the echo of the river, oil, rust, and the quiet breath of a man who kept his promises in the dark. Morning came gray and weightless, the kind of dawn that felt half asleep itself. Rachel stood by the window, watching the mist roll off the rooftops. The strip of black tape still lay in the drawer, small and silent like a promise she wasn't sure she wanted. The house was still. Lily's quiet breaths came from the next room, steady and fragile, like a metronome reminding her what mattered. Nick's truck wasn't there. Only a faint mark in the wet pavement showed where it had been. For the first time in weeks, she felt completely alone, and realized how dangerous that comfort could be. She packed slowly, as if trying not to wake something that might be listening. Clothes, diapers, the birth certificate, a few $100s in cash she had hidden under the drawer lining. She moved with the quiet precision of someone escaping, not leaving. Every sound seemed amplified, the click of the suitcase, the hush of a zipper, the creak of the floorboards. When she paused to check on Lily, the baby blinked up at her, then reached out, that innocent reflex that always made Rachel's heart fold inward. She whispered, "It's time to go," though she wasn't sure if she was saying it to the child or herself. Outside, the neighborhood was just waking up. A milk truck passed, tires hissing on the wet road. Somewhere a radio played a love song that sounded too bright for the hour. She carried Lily to the kitchen and set her gently into the stroller. The air smelled of coffee and rain. On the table lay Nick's note, folded, simple, with grease smudges along the edges. "If you leave, don't look back. Not tonight, not later." No name. No explanation. Rachel stared at it for a long time, feeling that familiar pull, the mixture of anger and fear he always managed to leave behind. She almost tore it up. Instead, she folded it smaller, tucked it into her pocket, and zipped the suitcase shut. At 8:03, the phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Where are you going?" His voice. Quiet. Controlled. She didn't ask how he knew. "Somewhere safer," she said. "There's no safer place than the one I'm watching." "That's the problem," she replied. "You're always watching." Silence. She could hear rain starting again on his end of the line. "Rachel," he began, but she cut him off. "No. You don't get to do this again. You don't get to stand outside and call it protection." Lily stirred softly. Rachel's hand went automatically to the stroller handle, her body moving before her mind could catch up, mother's instinct stronger than fear. Nick's voice dropped lower. "I didn't come back to trap you. You know that." "I don't know anything anymore," she said. "All I know is that every time you say it's over, something starts chasing us." He didn't answer right away. She could hear the faint buzz of traffic behind him, the metallic hum of an engine idling. "You're right," he said at last. "Maybe peace doesn't follow people like us. Then maybe it's time we stop pretending." For a moment neither of them spoke. She thought about the warehouse, the night, the tape by her door, the quiet violence that always seemed to orbit him. And the terrible truth that she had started to depend on that silence. "Rachel," he said softly, "if you go, don't tell me where. I can't protect you from the distance." "I don't need you to protect me," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "You do. You just hate that it's true." That cut deeper than she expected. Before she could find words, he added, almost gently, "The truck will still be near the river tonight. If you change your mind." The line went dead. She left the phone on the table, unplugged. By mid-morning, the suitcase was by the door, Lily bundled in her arms. Through the window she could see the first traces of sunlight breaking through the clouds, making the wet pavement glisten like new metal. The city didn't know it was losing someone. It never does. Rachel hesitated only once, at the threshold. The smell of the house clung to her, rain, milk, and the faint trace of oil he always carried. She turned the key in the lock, but didn't look back. At the end of the street, a car passed slowly, too slowly. Tinted windows. No plates. She felt the pulse of fear again, that cold certainty that the past was never really behind her. But this time, she didn't freeze. She crossed the street, head high, pushing the stroller through the shallow puddles until the sound of tires faded. The rain started again, soft and endless. By the time she reached the corner, she couldn't tell whether she was running from him, or from the part of herself that still waited for him to come back. Behind her, the little house sat quiet, curtains drawn, phone unplugged. And somewhere far off by the river, a truck engine turned once, then fell silent. The distance between them had begun, fragile, deliberate, and necessary. But even as she walked away, she knew, silence wasn't the same as safety. It never was. Weeks passed like waves, each one erasing what the last had written. Nick found work at a small harbor town on the Oregon coast, fixing boats instead of bikes. The tools were the same, the smell of oil familiar, but the sound of the sea changed everything. It never stopped moving, never stopped reminding him that silence was an illusion. He rented a room above a bait shop, one window, one chair, a view of gray water and gulls. He spoke little, slept less. Sometimes, when the fog rolled in, he imagined it was carrying pieces of Portland back to him, the hum of the garage, the echo of her voice, the rain against her window. Then the first letter came. No return address. Inside, a photo. Rachel, standing by a small garden fence, holding Lily on her hip. The baby was smiling at something beyond the frame, eyes bright, a face that already knew how to trust. There were no words, just that image, and the faint smell of paper that had traveled far. He placed it on his workbench beside a wrench, like a talisman. More letters followed, never regular, never predictable. A photo of Lily in a yellow raincoat. A seashell taped to a scrap of paper, she found this. Thought of you. Sometimes a blank card, just silence, written down. He never answered. He didn't know where to send the words. He only kept them, stacked carefully in a tin box under the bed, as if holding on too tightly might make them vanish. On clear evenings, he walked to the edge of the pier. The ocean stretched endlessly, a moving mirror for everything he couldn't fix. He'd light a cigarette, though he rarely smoked, and let the wind take the smoke out toward the horizon. People in town called him quiet, polite, harmless. They never asked why his hands shook slightly when he heard car engines he didn't recognize. Or why he always sat facing the door. One afternoon, a letter came without a photo. Only a drawing, a child's hand pressed in blue paint, small and imperfect. Beneath it, one word, Daddy. Nick stared at it for a long time, the air thick with salt and memory. He set the page beside his tools. Looked out the window toward the sea, the endless, watchful sea. And exhaled. Not safe. Not free. But alive. And somewhere far inland, behind closed curtains and quiet lullabies, Rachel looked at the same gray sky and whispered his name, not as a prayer, but as a reminder. That sometimes survival itself is the only kind of love that lasts.